Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
All right, welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight with me, this roundtable edition, I should say, and tonight with me I have Mr. Red Pill Junkie.
Hello, good evening.
And I have Mike Clelland.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here.
And you haven't been on it a bit, Mike.
I haven't been on. I think I've been on more than any person. I mean, me and Aaron Gullius, I think, did 100 separate episodes.
But it's been a little while since we've had you on.
Yeah.
That is true. That was like a 92 part series.
Yeah.
And I still get lots of comments on that too.
Oh, good. He's a much better speaker on the history of UFOs than I am. So he was, I felt like I sat and listened to him talk.
No, it was a great series, you guys. I mean, I really enjoyed the rapport between the two of you. I think was really special.
Mm-hmm. I would agree.
Michigan. We're both from Michigan.
That must be it.
Okay.
But, it was that you're both respect one another, even though you have very different viewpoints on stuff. And I think that's where you get progress with stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think our viewpoints are that different, but yeah, I guess they're just our way of framing it. I guess maybe that's, yeah.
Framing it, and I think, like you're more interested in the abduction type scenario. He's more interested in the lights in the sky, etc.
Yeah.
You look at it in very different ways, I guess is the way to say it.
Because Aaron is looking at it from the outside, right? Whereas Mike is looking at it from the really, really inside out of this phenomenon,
And I think Aaron, because he really hasn't had any experiences, also tends to lean toward being a little more skeptical of stuff.
Sure. And I can be skeptical too.
Oh, I know you can.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, if you have that razor's edge, one side's slightly more skeptical, the other side's slightly more willing to believe. You're on the slightly more willing to believe. He's on the slightly more skeptical.
I will beg to differ. Really? I read Mike's blog for many, many years, and Mike was his biggest skeptic.
Oh, sure, absolutely. I'm not arguing that. I'm not saying Mike's not a skeptic.
Yeah. There's a term that which I like. There's a term which I think is Christopher Knowles uses, and is skeptic. So, which I think is sort of sums it up. When you're.
Well, and anyone who asks questions and questions everything is a skeptic.
It's good to be skeptical. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what the term means. It comes from the Greek, and it's all about continuing to ask questions.
Yeah.
And it's when you stop asking questions and think you have all the answers that you stop learning, especially with this type of stuff. And
getting back to the topic at hand, do you think this continuous asking of questions, the continuous self-doubt, could that be a prompt or the initiator to the all too common depressive states that haunts many people in this field?
We should actually mention the topic tonight is we're going to call it the dark night of the soul, but it's a little bit on depression before we get into the deeper aspect of that. And you're absolutely right. I think that sometimes you have that sort of you ask questions over and over, and at some point you feel like you just don't have the answers, and it gets depressing, and you start to lose faith. And that definitely leads you into that spiritual crisis. But I think when I look around, I feel like so many people suffer from depression. Like it's not a minor thing. Like it's almost epidemic in our culture.
And stigmatized, so no one talks about it.
Yeah.
Oh, true.
And I think that was, in a funny way, prepped me. Like I went through a series of, I went through I mean, I guess I'd been going through it on and off all my life. It never had a name until the winter of 1992, 93, when I was 30 years old. And then I, actually had to go to a doctor and what was wrong with me, and I couldn't function. And they said, "Oh, you're depressed." And I'm like, "What?" I had no idea what it was. But after that, I talked about it, and I kind of made myself, I mean, like it, I would, talk about it at, restaurants and my experiences, and it was very interesting because people did not want to hear about it. And at the same time, what would happen is you'd, talk to 5 people, and 4 people would kind of like cringe. And then later the 5th person would, find me all alone and say, "Listen, thank you so much for saying that, because, I have these experiences too." And they would kind of whisper it, looking around the room first, making sure no one was listening. So yeah, it's stigmatized. And I think that had a huge impact on my ability to, because I don't know why I was so forthright about it, but but it had I felt like a little preparatory phase for trying to come to terms with the more bizarre, seemingly UFO stuff that has intersected with my life, where I was just as forthright about that, and it is equally stigmatized.
Well,
and then I equally get people who take you. Well, it's usually more than 5 people around the dinner table. There must need to be about 15, and then one will take you aside. So,
And there's different types of depression too. I mean, because there are people who are clinically depressed who have a chemical imbalance that causes them to just be depressed. It's not their fault. It's not something they can shake off or just fix, because it's built into their body chemistry. And whether or not that comes from things in our world, like, okay, so we slaughter animals for meat, and those animals have that fear because they're slaughtered in such horrible ways. At least most of them, not all of them. But you have these killing houses that just, the animals are terrified when they die. And this could be, first of all, it's releasing fear hormones into the meat. And it's also releasing a lot of negative energy into that meat, which we're then consuming. So how much of that plays a part in how we feel on an everyday basis for the people who eat meat? We're exposed to tons of chemicals every day.
Look, it's not that it's not that I want to be the Tom discussion, right? The Scientologist who is against English psychiatry. But I don't know. I think there's something about this idea that depression being a chemical imbalance, some problem in your biology, and that is the way that is treated in our society. But I sometimes think that maybe it's the result of being. It's not the result of having some kind of toxicity in your body, but it's the result of being in a toxic society or a toxic environment. And I do believe that our society is in many, many ways toxic. And
Yes.
I feel that some people have a natural rejection toward that toxicity. And that is manifested in the way of depression. And I know that, it's kind of corny for someone with my moniker to quote The Matrix, but it's kind of like what Morpheus says, to Neo, when says, there's something that you've always known about this world, and it's like a splinter in your head driving you mad. That this world is messed up. This world is running through values that are not only meaningless, but if we observe them objectively, they are psychotic. We are forcing people to live miserable lives, work, God knows how many hours. And I just read an article in Japan about, some 31-year-old reporter in Japan who literally killed herself by working too hard, and that they even have a word for that. I think it's corisho or something like that. So, and we're forcing ourselves to work too many hours in doing things that we don't like, in pursuit of things that the system keeps telling us we must have in order to be happy, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like a bigger house and a color TV and the latest iPhone and all of these things. And if you don't have that, you're a loser. And meanwhile, we are poisoning our planet. We are building walls between us. We are arming ourselves because we are terrified of our neighbors, and this is quote unquote the normal way of thinking. And so the people who are rejecting that and say, I'm stuck into this environment and I don't see a way out of this, and we think that being depressed about it is is some kind of disease. I think that is actually a sign of sanity.
Okay, fair enough. I can't argue that. But I do think there are a lot of factors at play.
Of course,
I mean that is definitely one of them. And I think that's a planned factor. Honestly, I think that the powers that be, the people who are making all the money, want us to feel that way. Always want us to feel in need of something, and never satisfied with what we have, which certainly is going to make someone depressed. But I mean there are things. I mean, there's the obvious type of depression that people will go through when they lose a pet or a loved one or something like that.
True.
Well, that's mourning. That's
Yeah.
normal, and that should be expected, and that's healthy in any kind of human relationship. Yes.
Right. But it is a form of depression, where you just feel like, how am I going to go on without this or this person or this pet that meant so much to me.
Mhm.
Yes, and that's one of the tests. I mean, you can take a simple test online. There's like 10 questions, and they're all very simple. Have you been depressed? So the issue is then, the severity and the length and the duration and the source. So, I mean,
Yeah.
that was the problem
Yeah.
with me. I had no source. There was nothing to point to. There was no dead pet. There was no death in the family. And it was very probably, I mean, it's really shocking to me to like, why do I feel this way?
Mhm.
And I mean, and I was, how to say it, like creative enough to like, spin these stories. I mean, this is very like I must have done something to deserve this. Is kind of that, and that's very normal. I mean, any therapist who's talked to anyone who's depressed will, they'll hear that I must have done, this irrational guilt. I mean, there's things that are right there in the checklist. One of them was impending doom. I mean, I felt like a meteorite was about to like smash into the planet. That was very palpable.
When I get depressed, a lot of times it's that feeling. It is sort of that impending doom feeling. But it's. I totally forgot what I was going to say about it.
Impending doom, yeah. I don't know. Yeah, it's.
Well, it was in grade school when I saw the movie The Day After.
Mm.
You remember that?
Oh yeah.
And I was drawing nuclear mushrooms in art class, in grade school. And thank God they didn't have some kind of like psychiatrist in the school. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure I would have ended up in some padded room,
Yeah. Well, you're not supposed to draw that stuff.
I know, but I did. I really was kind of obsessed with that idea. I mean, ever since I've been, even before I was a teen, I was, obsessed with the idea of nuclear Armageddon, and then, the idea of global warming and all of these things. To me, they were omnipresent. And then to realize that most people, like Mike said, they don't want to talk about it. They want to keep those kinds of fears as far away of their normal thinking as possible.
Mm-hmm.
That's, to me, that was kind of like irrational. And the idea of being alone in thinking that way. I think that feeling of isolation, it's the worst part of the depression.
I know what I was going to say. I feel like, I mean, one of the descriptors of, whether you're depressed is, do you just not enjoy doing things? Do you not want to do the stuff that you normally, makes you feel something? To me, it almost feels like a lack of life energy.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like you feel dead inside. You're just kind of like, I don't care. Like there's something missing from the inside of me right now.
Well, that's interesting because I mean, the first symptom for me of depression, which I actually haven't suffered from for a few years, and whatever, it can get rainy and I can get the blahs. I can certainly be, catch a cold and feel crummy, and that has a sort of depressive quality to it. But I have not been clinically depressed for a few years, and I'm very, very grateful for that. I went on Prozac in, I guess it would have been 1993 or so, probably 3 or 4, and I had been on some other medications, and that was right at the dawn of the Prozac era, and I had been on another set of medications that were really problematic. They had lots of side effects. Imipramine was the medication I was on, and when I went on Prozac, it takes a long time for that to take effect. I mean, it takes, nearly a month in some cases, many weeks. And so you take it and you feel crummy. And then I just remember there was a day I walked outside. It was a spring day and the birds were chirping and the sun was shining and the sun felt warm. And I kind of had some errand to do. And I walked from my house to the car and I said, "Oh, what a nice day." And I literally stopped in my tracks. Like I had not had that clear of a thought. Like, oh, it's a nice day. Like, oh, it feels nice, right? It's warm. It's a nice day. And that should be a very normal emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I could have said, well, the bird, I can visually see that the sun is shining, and then people equate that to a nice day, and I can hear the sound of the birds chirping, and I can feel the warmth on my skin. I can equate all those things. And then given social norms and understanding of what people consider appropriate, I would conclude that people could consider this environment a nice day. I would have to go through that kind of rigmarole and come to the same conclusion. I didn't. Mm-hmm. I just went, oh, it's a nice day. And I remember literally freezing up and oh my God, I have not had a clear thought like that in maybe decades. I was probably 30 years old. I probably hadn't had a thought that, and it was shocking to me. I was like, holy I recognized it right then, the burden of what I had been suffering from. Well, you're asking about, I mean, I was on antidepressants, and I feel like that they can be, I know there's a lot of bad press about antidepressants, and I recognize they're probably overprescribed. And I've heard people sort of say oh, it's a happy pill. And I'm like, no, it's not a happy pill. It is a pill that alleviates the symptoms of clinical depression. So to me, that's a powerful tool. Yes, it can be overprescribed. Yes, someone may go on it and stay on it for too long. It may, dosages, different drugs. I mean, there's all kinds of side effects and reasons to struggle with these things. But antidepressants alleviate the symptoms of clinical depression in many cases. I'm sure there's I've heard all kinds of things like that. One thing that actually shows up is that there's and I'm citing stuff. I should be careful what I cite because this is all I would be.
What I've heard is that antidepressives is so they shield you from the valleys of emotion, right? They shield you from the really low state of emotion, but they also numb you from the peaks of emotion. So they only leave you in kind of a medium.
I think that depends on the medication. And believe me, I've been on a bunch of them over the decades, and that definition fits for some of them. But I found that my initial few months on Prozac, I was like, when I describe it to people, it sounds like I'm talking about cocaine or something like that. It sounds like I'm on some crazy, like high, and that wasn't what it was. It was that I could all of a sudden hear music and go like, oh my gosh, I remember really enjoying music. I can't remember the last time I enjoyed listening to music. Like I was hungry. I had no appetite. I enjoyed eating food. So it wasn't like I was in a mania state. It was more like I was in a like a normal state. Yes. So I agree completely that there are some medications that I've been on. I'm just speaking from my own direct experience, and I'd have to look up the names of them. They're all kind of gobbledygook in my mind now. But Prozac itself I had been on a drug before then that had all kinds of side effects. And when I was on Prozac, and it only lasted for a few months, and I stayed on it for 7 years. And then I eventually got to that point where I felt like I wasn't benefiting from the medication anymore. But those first few months were remarkable. I made more forward progress in those few months than I had in a decade.
Are you still on some kind of antidepressant?
I haven't been. I can't remember the last time I was on. Probably, I don't know, maybe 6 years ago or so. The last time I was on something.
Well, that's good.
Okay.
Now, you know what I've actually found? Vitamin D. For me, I'm not a psychiatrist, and I can't say, so I'm not. But for me, vitamin D has been very helpful. Just over the counter, just a recommended dosage. It's very helpful. Yeah. So is exercise, and so is eating less sugar. So,
yeah.
But now, Mike, given your background and your entanglement with the UFO contact experience, will you consider your depressive states as being a side effect or some kind of post-traumatic stress disorder caused by these, high strangeness experiences you've had in your past that you weren't able to reconcile yet?
Well, so I will say the answer to that is yes, I have considered it, and I have no answer. And I'm very cautious to say, aliens made me depressed. But I will say that so I had a missing time event in 1974. I was coming home from a high school football game by about between an hour and a half to 2 hours. And I would have been 12 years old. I would have been in junior high school. The first memory I have of what I now call depression takes place in that junior high school. And I remember just kind of like not wanting to talk to anyone. And I would kind of like pace the halls in a way that would fast enough that no one would talk to me. And I remember being very, very introverted in that chapter. And I recognize it now as clinical depression. Did one create the other? Did the missing time, the unaccounted for memories cause me to be depressed? I have very seriously considered that. And I don't have an answer. What I can say is I have met with Bud Hopkins, and I've met with Dave Jacobs, and I've met with Leo Sprinkle, and I've met with Barbara Lamb, and I've sat across from them. These are all UFO abduction researchers. Some of them are a little more the people have very strong opinions on every one of these people that I just mentioned, but and rightly so. They're out on the edge of their research. But I would sit with them and I would say, listen, just heads up before we even start this, I have had a long history of clinical depression and what I call severe clinical depression. And they would just nod their head and go, yep. And you could just tell, like I was not the first one that had told them that. It seemed to me. And I've actually tried to pin other researchers down and say, is it higher than average? And I've never gotten a good answer. And and Leo Sprinkle's a clinician. He's and so is Barbara Lamb. These are trained. He's a doctor. Leo Sprinkle has a doctorate in psychology, and Barbara Lamb is a licensed family therapist. I think that's right. And so these people are in a position to recognize and to know, and they could not give me a true answer to if there's a statistical blip in the people who are having these contact experiences, and are they more depressed? I would actually say there's certainly more and this is something that I have heard addressed by clinicians, is that they are certainly more people who claim the UFO contact experience have the symptoms that some clinicians would say indicate trauma in their life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
well, Kenneth Ring, postulated the encounter-prone personality after finding that people with near-death experiences and UFO abduction experiences had similar things in their lives, including usually some trauma in their youth.
And I have no trauma in my youth. I had a nice household and stuff like that, unless something happened that I don't remember, So yes.
It could also be that state of depression, whatever that is, opens us up to something else.
And that's and that's where there's something called Shaman Sickness that shows you can Google it. Shaman Sickness is something that's not recognized in the West, but if you were living in a village in Brazil, they would understand what that meant completely.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. And then that kind of leads into the whole dark night of the soul thing, that in some cases depression can lead you to spiritual insight.
Have you ever talked with Dr. Janet Coley?
No.
She's written several books on this, and I think that on exactly this topic. So, and she's also a UFO abduction researcher and hypnotherapist. Okay. Well, she does a form of hypnotherapy, but
I've developed a major problem with anyone that hypnotizes abductees at this point, because I feel like they're hijacking what's actually going on to people.
Perhaps, it's a slippery slope. You have to be careful doing anything. So but she does a very mild form of hypnotherapy. So
okay, all right.
So but she has she's looking at trauma.
But I mean, my experience, my point of shift came probably in my late 90s. And after a lot of experiences that led me up to one particular person who I had gotten together with, and I felt like, okay, what now? Everything led up to this, and now what happens? I almost felt like I didn't have anywhere to go. And I got very severely depressed, and it was one of those, why does anything matter? Why are we here? What am I bother doing anything? I had trouble doing anything at all, or enjoying anything, because I just felt like there was no point, no purpose, no nothing. And even though I looked at everything that had happened to me at that point and said, okay, all this stuff has led to this, it's like looking at a map, which to me, logically says there was a point behind this, At the same time, I couldn't see it. And it actually, this was the point I discovered the Seth material. And that's what ended up knocking me out of that depressive state. I read Seth Speaks and was just so blown away, and it kind of gave me something I was missing. And from that point on, it literally changed my life, because it hit me right at that point.
How interesting, because I have almost the same experience. I could say that almost word for word, but it was Neil Donald Walsh and his channeled book, Conversations with God, that was kind of knocked me. And it's very, I listen to it now, and I kind of was, I listened to it, but I ended up getting this shows you how long ago it was. Back in the 90s, I got cassettes, the book on tape and cassettes, and they were all lined up in this cardboard box, and from all three books, and I listened to them somewhat compulsively, and they were very therapeutic. It just painted a picture of reality that I on some deeper level understood and felt like was a valid. I just liked that idea of reality. If I was going to live my life, I might as well live it in with framing reality that way.
I think with the Seth material, it was a matter of suddenly things I didn't think I would ever have answers for suddenly were making sense.
Exactly. Yes.
Suddenly it was like, oh, wait, and that makes me think this and makes me wonder about this. And so suddenly I was moving forward again. And I think it was that dead stop I came to where I didn't know where forward was, and we always look at that. Oh, we want that perfect life. That's, we have this, this, and this. Well, when you get all those things, what then? Like now you have no stimulation, you have no drive.
I've spoken with someone, a friend of mine, and she has dealt with a lot of depression in her life, and she gets kind of angry at like people, and she's like, "Oh, those people have never had any problems. Those people have just everything has gone right with those people, and they're just living this life." And I'm so envious, and I say, yes, but those people are boring.
I was on Den of Lore the other night, and the host, Chris Zucker, had said, I mentioned we were doing this show on the Dark Night of the Soul and depression and stuff, and he had mentioned he suffered from depression. And he had postulated, back in like the Dark Ages, how depressed those people must have been, being under, the rule of a king and having really nothing and just being, absolutely miserable and barely having food to eat, et cetera, et cetera. But I wonder if they really were depressed or if they were so focused on living that wasn't really an issue.
My sense is there probably was a sort of threat of depression. It probably may statistically like not vary too much from where we're at now. I think that, we can romanticize like, living outside and growing our own food and all that stuff. But I mean, good grief, women died at, in childbirth in ways that we can't even, there's just so many awful things. And that's just one of them. So yeah, but my sense is that there's probably been like I guess, what was it? There's passages in the Bible that like, I can't remember what it was. And I wrote it, it's actually quoted in the Owl book, where someone says, they talk about owls, and owls are, it's referenced in the Bible. And they used as sort of an adjective, like gloomy, right? Owls are out at night, and they're a gloomy animal. And someone wrote this thing about, how the barren landscape was a desert and only inhabited by the owls of night. And it was this sort of poetic thing. And it's really dismal. And then many biblical researchers, or some biblical researchers, have said that, this is the kind of thing that someone would write if they were clinically depressed, this dark stuff like this. So they're wondering whether the actual author of that prose, no one knows who it is, these thousands of years later, was actually suffering from clinical depression.
That's interesting. I guess I mean it too, in the sense that they're not going to be depressed because they're bored in the Middle Ages, because they're so focused on surviving day to day. It's almost like, talk about the ultimate thing to take your mind off of it.
Well, that's debatable, because it's possible that during the time of the hunter-gatherers, people, work less than what we work right now. They will, just hunt from the very early morning, and maybe they will return to the campsite by noon with whatever game they managed to catch, and the woman will have gathered some herbs and maybe some mushrooms or some fruits, and the rest of the time is just like, maybe fixing some hut, and the rest of the time is just like, play and chat and making love and do whatever. So I doubt, I'm skeptical of that assumption that people in previous times devoted more time to just survival, activities. You know what I mean? I think that they, and think about it, that they had more time in the darkness, right? By 6 p.m. the sun went down, and it's just you and a candle, if you have the luxury of a candle. And if you don't have a candle, that's it's you and your thoughts, and thinking about. I think that people all over history have been wondering about the same kind of like big questions that we keep wondering
certainly.
about. Who am I? What am I doing here? What's the purpose of all of this?
And then we create religions.
Yeah, we create religions and we create philosophies, and some people have contacts with strange realities that get glimpses of the idea that what we are worrying about is really, no big deal.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that, people who experience near-death experience, a great majority of them, uh, they completely overhaul their lifestyle, their way
Oh
of
yeah.
thinking. If they were, working a 9 to 5 job, trying to get that, Christmas bonus or whatever, they quit their jobs and they devote more time to their families, and maybe they start, doing other things like, keeping a garden or whatever. They realize that with things that we worry about are, really no big deal.
Agreed.
Okay. All right. Um, I don't know where to go from there.
One of the things one of the reasons because I wanted to join you guys into this subject is because nobody talks of the fact that many people in this field, people who have an interest in the quote unquote paranormal, suffer from depression. And I know a lot of people, colleagues, people who write about this stuff, they suffer from depression. And to me, that is of interest. That is, I don't know if that is because uh, it's a result of society being more cruel, or the system being, more harsh to people who want to devote their time to pursuing this kind of interests, and instead of doing quote unquote sensible things like, like, I don't know, have a career in accounting or whatever. You're trying to make a living writing about the paranormal or researching, ufology. You pretty soon you realize that doesn't really bring food to the table. You need to keep your day job indefinitely. There's just a handful of people who actually manage to have a good enough living,
Yeah.
pursuing this, maybe. But I don't know if this kind of depression or loneliness, or feeling isolated is just a natural reaction of the fact that we are all outsiders. We've always felt like outsiders, like we're really not part of the herd. We're the black sheeps. We think about things that most people don't think about, and we are interested in things that most people consider to be silly, nonsensical, even dangerous nowadays. So that's what I wanted to mention also, aside from the spiritual aspects of the dark night of the soul, the fact that there are many among us who are going, or who have went through phases of depression, and we don't talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And like, again, is it because there's a personality type that's interested in this type of stuff? Is it because we want to know more about why we're here, so we look to the edge of it, which is the paranormal, the unexplained? I mean, I know I found the Seth material because in that state of being utterly and completely depressed, like it was the lowest I've ever been in my life, I started looking into near-death research, and I'm going, is there anything new? Is there anything that really, strikes a chord, or says anything new that hasn't been done? And what I kept finding is these, fairly scientifically written sites, talking in detail about the facts of stuff that have been discovered in near-death experiences, followed by, and Seth says, and I'd be like, what is it with this channeled entity? Why does this one particular one keep coming up? And I had picked up a Seth book for like $1.50 or something at some small used bookstore in the basement of a store in Ithaca. I think it was called Shoestring Books. And I figured it would be good for a laugh someday, so I picked it up. And I went, where's that Seth book? And I dug around for it, and I went to the chapter he had about what happens when you die. And I realized that before near-death research had taken off in the mid-'70s, Seth was talking about everything that we had discovered in near-death research, explaining some of the anomalies, like why some people have experiences and others don't. And even, like, one of the recent things I had found in doing this research online was that there was a doctor who said, some people who have near-death experiences didn't die. And they were having them, where their body never died and they still had a near-death experience. And here's Seth saying, yes, well, the spirit leaves the body at different times. Sometimes it sticks around afterwards, long after the person's dead. Other times it'll leave before the body dies. And I'm going, well, son of a bitch. Like, he literally has it all written right here. And that's what kind of kicked it in. But it started with that, that sort of, why are we here? What's the point? Is there, are we just dead when we're dead? Like, I wanted to know something. And that led me to the Seth material, which then told me something.
And I mean, I have often referred to my depression chapter as a death and rebirth. I mean, I feel like I think that's very accurate. I think that's very valid, to say that, that's the phoenix rising from the ashes. I mean, it
sucks, but
I mean, somehow you have to integrate it into your life and move on. And that may take years and years and years. It may never happen. And I had Prozac, and I had, those books, the Neil Donald Walsh books that similar to the Seth books. So yes, a death and rebirth. I was one person before I succumbed to the darkest depression, which was when I was 30, and I was a different person afterwards. And it was kind of crappy because I feel like I just look at a chapter of my life. I just remember where I was, and there was years where my identity was the depressed guy. Like my identity was I was the depressed guy, and that was, I don't want to say unhealthy, because I guess I had to move through that phase. At a certain point, it just didn't serve me anymore, and I could address, and I was like kind of ravenously reading these, I don't want to say self-help books, but esoteric stuff, and so that's the what. There's an author, Peter Kramer, Dr. Peter Kramer. He wrote a book in the 1990s. I think it was late 80s, early 90s. It must have been around 1990. He wrote a book called Listening to Prozac, which is considered one of the first books on the subject of, what does this mean to psychotherapy to have this new drug that can have such powerful results. And before Prozac, I had a sort of speech impediment. Sometimes it shows up now where if I'm tired or something like that, I'll have these unusually long pauses in my speech. And before Prozac, those were pretty pronounced. And I just remember it went away, poof, gone completely when I was on Prozac. A speech impediment, I was cured. And it wasn't, I could control it, but I certainly recognized that I was struggling with it. It wasn't like a stammer. It was like these unusually long pauses where I would just kind of get stuck. And that was gone. It never came back to the same degree. Sometimes it still shows up now. But in his book, he cites a lot of unusual cases like that where people have these issues, and so suddenly they're, these issues that they didn't tie directly into depression are changed. And but he is very clear in his written work, and I think in his other book too, which I think is called Understanding Prozac or Understanding Depression. He's written a series of books, and I read 2 of them. But he's very clear that it is the creative person, it's the artist. There's this romantic vision of the artist, the torture. I mean, Vincent van Gogh, right? This is like this powerful, and even modern day, the comic book artist who's just like this, clutching his head in his attempt to get these ideas down on paper. That's a real. That's not a caricature. That's a a real thing. The creative person. You go to an art school and find, and look at the on-campus counselor, the line outside the door. It's going to be a lot longer than at the normal college. I may be exaggerating a little bit, but I'm using that as a, sort of to make a point. But yes, so the creative type person, the artist, the illustrator, the musician, the poet, they suffer from this malady more than others. Yeah. Why that is, there's no good answer, but I mean, think of like Neil Young lyrics, like how depressing those are, but how poetic, I mean, we're, someone who's not depressed, drives their car and listens to, sad Neil Young music.
Yeah, well, there's this quote from some scientists who said that happy people don't build civilizations, right? Happy people that are content with what they have, and there are the others who think that things could be better, things could be improved. Obviously, there's the paradox, those people will never be content with what they managed to build, right?
Yeah.
But I also wanted to touch about other aspect we haven't spoken of, the idea of sense of purpose. Because I think that when I was invited by Greg Taylor to be a part of the Daily Grail, and at first when he approached me and said, "Do you want to be part of the team?" My first reaction was, no, thanks. I can't. I don't want to. But then he said, "Well, think about it. The invitation is open. And we will be glad to, if you came aboard." And I thought about it, and that I went to. It was the Christmas holidays, New Year's Eve, and I was sitting all by myself in a hotel room with my parents in a beach resort here in Mexico, and I say, "What the heck, let's do it," which was just not like me, because I'm the indecisive guy, and this guy who always thinking of the worst case scenario. And I decided to jump and take the opportunity, and I think that was my Prozac, you guys. I mean, that was the best decision that I've made in my entire life. And also, thinking about it, I think that also greatly improved into the way that I used to be. I used to suffer from greater episodes of depression before I took the job on the Daily Grail, and after that, the depression episodes still came, but they were less severe. It was like, holy hell, I managed to find my purpose in life. Like I found my tribe. I found people who were interested in the same things that I was interested in, and I felt that I was doing what I was supposed to do. That I was kind of like fulfilling my job. And I feel, Mike, that similar to the things that you have spoken of, the sense of mission that you and other people who have experienced, the contact scenario, that you felt driven by this sense of purpose, the sense of mission, and maybe after you to accept that sense of mission and that you embark on it, that kind of like helps you to deal with the depression stuff.
I've been very fortunate to have a number of jobs that felt very rewarding. And I'll say straight up, listen, you want to walk down the path of poverty, you write a UFO book, and you will like.
Or you write for paranormal news.
Yeah. There's no. I mean, it's so yeah. So there's but at the same time, I get these wonderful letters, and it's very heartening. So I get everything we value in our country can be like summed up in a spreadsheet with a dollar sign on it, and everything that I value. I mean, obviously I have to eat and stuff like that, but I feel like I just feel like I'm living this, I'm broke. I'm like in credit card debt, and I am doing that in order to finish the second book. But I like I get it's like opening my email and like reading the letters that people send to me is so heartening. I feel blessed, and I am proud of myself that I freaking went way, way, way out on a limb to write what I wrote and to say what I've been saying over on these blogs, because people, for the most part, are responding in this really amazing way. And now on a, the next step is I have a responsibility to these people.
Sure.
Like I have a responsibility. It's impossible. I just get a lot of, and I'm like, it's a little book. I'm not, it's, I mean, what Whitley Strieber went through, and I'm just getting a trickle of stuff coming in, but it keeps me busy. These accounts that come in, people ask for my help, and I'm not a therapist, and I offer what I can. But yeah, so I feel like I am leading a rewarding life because of my, what you just said, like, oh, what the hell, right? Screw it, I'm going to do this, like I'm going to do a podcast, and screw it, I'm going to like use my real name and go online. It's the stupidest thing I could have ever done. But it was really, in the big picture, I'm like fascinated how buoyant my life is because of it. And it's weird. I can't, I gotta it's like, I'm hearing stories that are way, way, way outside the boundaries of like normal conversation.
And I think a lot of that does come down to what is life all about? Like, why are we here? Does any of this stuff matter when we die?
And I suspect it probably does, in the same way that, this is, the life review that I've heard in these, I've read, I haven't immersed myself too deeply in the lore of the near-death experience literature, but enough to know that, there's this kind of like, like, wow, this is how interesting that this was important, and I impacted other people, and yeah, so.
Mm-hmm. Well, there was, and I'm trying to remember where I heard it, but I heard somewhere that the life review only happens in the near-death experience, not in the actual death experience.
Ah.
And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. It's there in the near-death experience to kind of get you back on track.
Cool.
But with the death experience, it's not necessary. When you actually die, you don't need the life review.
There's the logic to that, and it seems like someone smarter than us is kind of like setting the writing the rules on the back of the the game box there. So yeah.
If I remember right, Seth's version of what happens when you die was that you get to look at all the possibilities in your life, and see what would have happened had you chose different things.
Yeah, and I mean that's the big question, isn't it? What's who are we? Why are we here? What does it all mean? That doesn't get any simpler than that.
No.
And that's the same questions that would have plagued the cavemen when the sun went down.
And the and I always have that because life is linear to us, it always drives me crazy to go like, what would have happened had I done that differently? Like, would I be better off or worse off? I look at it as, I don't really regret things because I'm happy with my life, but I'm still curious. I wish there was a way to find out.
I know this sounds kind of crazy, but I sometimes feel that I get glimpses from other lives, parallel lives of myself in dreams. Like the idea, if you accept the concept of the multiverse, and the idea that there's, an infinitude of versions of ourselves, that doing different, maybe very similar things to what we're doing right now, or drastically different things. Sometimes I wonder if there's a way in which you can, connect to those alternative versions of you and see, what you will be doing if you had, turned right instead of left back in that, crossroads that you faced, in your past.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the stuff of, poetry in a way. Yeah. There's no way to know. And in reflecting on it and struggling with it, the question then arises, what happens when you get to the next crossroad in your life now? I mean, you can't change the past. So like, how are you going to deal with the next crossroads you come to? And I just encourage folks to be bold. I worked with a lot of youth, college age, and that was kind of something I would just say, like, be bold, come on, do something, barely go after it, grab it, so, and I don't always live that lesson.
Yeah.
I think it's impossible to always live that lesson, because you look at it sometimes, you go, okay, well, the consequences of failing here are pretty severe.
Yeah, or the job itself is so monumental. Yeah. The task at hand. Yeah. So, but at the same time, then I mean, whatever, hopefully you pick the appropriate thing to be bold with. Yeah.
Sure. As someone who has spent most of his life avoiding failure, I can tell you that it is far more depressing living that way. Risking and suffering from that is really not that hurtful in retrospect.
So why do you think you've lived in that way?
Out of cowardice. Simple as that,
But yes, but those are real emotions.
Sure, but out of our want to live out of your comfort zone. That's being afraid of the great beyond. A little turtle that's just been hatched, and you manage to reach the shore of the beach, and you see the great big ocean before you, and you think, oh my God, what's going to be there in store for me? All these creatures that are going to eat me, and I'm just a little turtle. And you wait and you wait and you wait until you probably die of the dehydration, or you're eaten by a seagull. It's a very normal human thing, I feel, and that's the way that human beings are infinitely malleable. Human beings are willing to go through, really incredible things in order not to face that idea of leaving their comfort zone. Even a horrible job will be comforting if it's predictable in its routine.
True.
Yeah, and I think that the routine is it's nice to have a routine. I mean, like I like my coffee just a certain way in the morning and everything like that. But at the same time,
True.
You have to, that's how to say it. I was like the ship is safe in the harbor, right? But the ship was not built for the harbor. The ship was built to like deal with the ocean waves. So it's got to leave the harbor. It sure is comforting, and I love being in the harbor sometimes. But then you're going to have to go out and crash in the ocean waves sometimes.
Yeah.
See, myself, I like constant change, but I like, within limitations. Like if one of the things that will depress me is if new things don't come along on a pretty regular basis. Like I can't even keep my desktop backgrounds the same. I have background switchers on all my stuff because I need to have constantly different things. Preferably not in my control, so they just kind of like pop up, It's like, oh, well, that's cool. I haven't seen that picture ever before.
And at the same time, I think people could live very rewarding lives. Like there's like in the era before the car. I mean, if you lived in a little village in Portugal, you may never leave that village. You may be born, raised, die in that village, and but at the same time, that's like the mythology of that era was always the adventure of leaving the village and going to the next kingdom, and crossing over the the mountain pass or crossing the ocean, and so there's. Yeah, so I mean, I'm certain that could be very powerful and very rewarding to live in that village. And in a way, I mean, we're all kind of on the fringe of this stuff. We're all doing this kind of esoteric research, and we're all doing it at a very public forum.
Yep.
And that, we have an electronic world now, and a publishing world, and a podcasting world where we can have we can be a little ripple in a great big pond and have an impact. And I think that honestly, I think that the podcasting and the internet and the availability of this kind of information, I mean, I just feel like since the internet has arrived, people are vastly more accepting of, like really weird stuff, like just whether it's yoga or meditation or UFOs or ghost hunting, it's kind of sloppy, obviously, but the internet, this electric medium, has allowed us to leave our village in ways that we never could have before.
I think the downside is sometimes it makes people too kind of gullible on some of this stuff.
That's the challenge, isn't it? I mean, that's the razor wire. That's the razor you have to walk, I mean, if you're too stoic and don't want to address any of the weird stuff, then you're on one side, and if you're too gullible and address everything, then you're on the other side. This is a balancing act, and there's no right answer for where that lies,
True.
Yeah.
True.
So what if it's a mess? You know what I mean? I think that's I mean, whatever. I love going to the UFO conferences and listening to people's stories. I mean, Cynthia Crawford just died. She was a wonderful, sweet, big-hearted woman. And she was I did an interview with her. She was the ET sculpture, and she would do these sculptures, and she would just look you straight in the eye, and she would just say, "I channeled the Lemurians when I made this sculpture," and people, and she would just, she was radiant, and like in a funny way, like, that's the red pill, isn't it? I mean, that's the placebo in a way. I mean, I have no idea whether has these real experiences. What I can say is she was a delight to be near. She had a wonderful glow about her, and
Yeah.
people resonated with her. So that's the same thing, like, going to the doing some sort of medical, testing some sort of new drug, and then, like, oh, here's a special pill, and you get the sugar pill, and then you're cured. I mean, that's like that's the mystery of it, isn't it? Like the 1/3 of the people like have great beneficial results from the sugar pill. So.
And that also speaks to, how much our mind has control of our reality. Any placebo does.
As does, that's like the Lemurians are, here to, shepherd us into a new age, and then you feel good.
Yeah. But obviously the hardest path is the path of, uncertainty. Accepting the fact that you may never get the answers that you are hoping to get.
And
I feel that's the path that, the true mystics choose to tread on. People like, I don't know, Mother Teresa or whatever, the ones that don't fall for the easy answers, the Lemurians, the Pleiadians, or it's just bunk. Is the idea of, keep walking, because it's all illusion. It's just, trying to get there, and you will be despaired because you will not see, an end to it. You will see an infinite horizon, and I feel that is kind of like the essence of the concept of the spiritual dark night of the soul. The feel that it never ends. You only have yourself to keep going, but you must keep going.
Yes, and that's the shaman sickness. I mean, this is a little bit simplified, but the young boy or girl in the tribe that goes through a crisis, a spiritual crisis, and we could say that's depression. We could call it by any number of names. That's just turning inward. And oftentimes there's a near-death experience. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who are shamans and have died Had the real, like that classic, like they are like, oh my God, it's so beautiful, I want to stay. And then the voice says, nope, you got to go back. You got work to do. And whoosh, they're back in their bodies. And so that work, in essence, whether it's metaphoric death through depression and reemergence into the land of the living, or of literal death of a near-death experience, and these people then go on to be shamans, and that fascinates me.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, this idea that I don't know, that life is too hard, and you there's a time when you say, I'm out of here. I want out. It's too hard. I can't take it anymore. The concept of, well, you chose it. You chose to be, in this video game of life, and you chose the level of difficulty. That this is something that I remember reading in Whitley Strieber's book, The Key. More or less, the idea that the souls that are living in this infinite realm, the only way they can get more perfected in bliss is by descending into an imperfect state, which is, our reality. Which is kind of like saying, okay, yeah, I'm going to choose living in this video game called Earth, and because I want to, level up as more as I can, I'm going to choose this level of difficulty. And maybe some souls say, no, I don't want to. I want to play in casual mode, So I'm going to be rich. I'm going to be, Paris Hilton. I'm going to be, I don't know, Jack Nicholson, whatever. And other souls, maybe they're more daring, They're saying, no, I'm going to choose living in Bangladesh, or I'm going to choose living in Somalia. Maybe some people will say this is just, a very stupid way to rationalize suffering in this world. But I think about it. I think about, I feel there's something to that concept.
And not to sound like a broken record here, but that's basically what Seth says. That we are basically we choose our lives. Like he was talking to someone in an ESP class that Jane would give, because she would let people just come for free and talk to Seth, and he would try and explain things to them. And he never claimed to be omniscient. He just claimed to have a better angle, a better view of our reality than we did necessarily. But he was talking about like someone losing a young child, and he would say, well, that child chose that person reincarnated to give you this thing that you needed, and it may seem like a horrible thing, but in the end you gained something out of that, even though you don't realize it, and that's why they came back. That's why they chose that. They never chose it to be here for any length of time.
And I feel like I have gained something from my clinical depression. I have gained a sensitivity that I never would have had beforehand. And it's been a while since I've been severely depressed, so I feel like I've distanced myself from that, and I feel like I've lost a little of that sensitivity, but I feel like I was a little mushy and overly sensitive for some of the time. And yes, but I feel like I am a better person now, having been through my dark night of the soul, which would have been 1993.
Yeah, mine was late 90s, probably 98, 99.
How old were you?
I don't know, 27, 28.
Yeah, I was 30. So yeah, so that's very interesting. There's a little statistic that women tend to go through it about 25. Men tend to go through it around 30, and that's a rough estimate. But so.
Well, you learn.
I wonder why.
You learn to appreciate things. I mean, you there. I know it's cliche and corny as hell, but there cannot be light without darkness.
True.
I once heard in a podcast this someone who was talking about a book from a Tibetan monk who came to America, and who was one of the first people who were teaching about Eastern philosophy, Eastern mysticism, how among Westerners, we think about enlightenment as if it was some kind of a state of eternal bliss, like, oh, you are in nirvana and if everything is wonderful. It's like, I don't know, a never-ending orgasm. That's why everybody
Right.
wants to achieve it, obviously. But no, the guy said, no, enlightenment is realizing that your lowest time, the time when life is hitting you the hardest, you realize that it will soon pass. And also realizing that when you are living through the greatest moment in your life, you are also aware that it's also transitory. Enlightenment is being aware of the transience of life. And that is something that we seldom think about, because what our Western culture is always driving us to hunt or to be chasing that high, be always happy. It's almost as happiness is becoming a chore in our lives, and if you're not happy, well, you're doing something wrong, right? And you feel bad about it, and it's terrible. It's one of the reasons why we don't confront things like death in a proper way in our culture. It's like people in Western culture may go most of their lives without seeing a dead body. It's very rare in our society. Whereas in other cultures, if your father or mother dies, and it's probably, in other cultures is far more frequent because they don't have maybe access to better medical treatments. It's very far more common to face the death of someone close to you, and you have the duty to prepare the body and give it the proper burial rites. And in our culture, death and old age are the things that we try to drive away. We're scared to death about it, that we're paranoid about it, that we're trying to find a way out of it. And even the smartest people among us think that they can actually cheat death, that all those nerds in Silicon Valley who think that they will upload their consciousness in a computer and they will attain immortality. And that tells you something about our state and our culture, that if we were managed to say, okay, I'm 44 years old, I don't know how much life I have left, I might die next week if there's another big earthquake, and that's okay. If I manage to say that, truthfully, because I'm not, but if I manage to say that truthfully, that would be, far more sane, far more healthy than the way that 99% of people conduct their lives in our society. If we've lost our fear of death, our culture will be far more different. And it's, for me, it's interesting to see all those experiments in which they give psilocybin doses to terminal patients, and one of the things that happens with that is that they lose their fear of death.
Yeah.
And that is great. But what if you did that to a 12-year-old? What if you took the fear of death to a 12-year-old? What will happen to that, to a society in which that happened? That's something that intrigues me.
I feel like a lot of 12-year-olds are already not afraid of death and do some
All
pretty
right.
stupid things because of it.
12-year-old
Sure,
boys,
okay.
yes.
12-year-olds. So 30-year-olds. I guess,
There.
I guess at 30 is when you're starting to think, okay, yeah, I guess I'm not immortal after all.
There was, I'm sure you guys are familiar with the Oatmeal Comic, the web
Sure.
comic,
Yeah.
and he had written a great thing, basically commenting on how people kept telling him he needed to be happy, and he said, I'm not happy, but I'm content, and he did it, of course, in comic form, and it was just, it hit me very strongly because that's how I feel. I'm not really even looking to be happy per se. I want to be content in what I'm doing. I want to feel like what I'm doing matters. And that's kind of what he was getting at. He's like, yeah, I may not be smiling. I may not be giddy and happy. He's like, but I like the way I am. He's like, I like feeling like I feel, that I'm content in doing what I'm doing. I think happiness by and large is transitory. No one's ever going to be happy all the time.
Yeah.
And so is sadness is transitory. And so, yes.
Yeah.
True.
So you need that sort of contentment, that thing you can do that makes you feel okay. You may not be super happy, but content is more important than happy.
Yeah. Because if you're pursuing that high state all the time, I mean, it's like alcohol. You become an alcoholic if you always want to feel that buzz. And also what happens, that your body starts to become accustomed to that. So that buzz that you have with the first drink or two, you only get it, after 5 or 10 drinks. So
right.
It's with everything, you think about it, it's even with music, with sex, with whatever, that fruitless pursuit of bliss. It's wrong because, like you said, if you don't understand that bliss is transitory, that that is, like the beauty of bliss. If you don't understand that, you're going to be miserable all of your life.
Yeah, if you were happy all the time, if you were blissed out all the time, you would have nothing to contrast it to. You would just be bored.
Exactly.
So those lows teach us something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because that's like how to say this without. I mean, I feel like I recognize in certain situations that certain people have never been depressed, and I recognize, like, oh, I can sense that this person has never been depressed, and they're viewing life a certain way, they're viewing reality a certain way, and it's a little less nuanced, At the same time, I recognize just the opposite when people have been depressed. There's a I guess they're kind of, I don't want to say like a prisoner being released. They've been knocked down a notch somehow, but they're also achieved something in the human spirit that can, like a compassion that they may never have had. Let's maybe put it that way.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, some depression is not unhealthy, I guess is kind of what you're saying.
I'm saying yes, and perhaps into society, some depression, if you wrestle with it, and I feel like I've done a lot of hard work on my own life. If you wrestle with it and make peace with it and move beyond it, and it can then, I feel like I've said this before, I'm a better person now, and I recognize other people. I see the best side of them, and it's often in a side where they have to dig into that, that history of depression.
And when we get back to the whole shamanic sickness thing, there's, that takes us back to the whole alien abduction thing, and I seriously wonder if what people are experiencing, and like I said, I feel is being so hijacked, is that step toward making people shamans. Like whatever is out there that is affecting things, is getting kind of hijacked when people get hypnotized, and it's creating false memories and a false narrative. Whereas if they followed it on their own, rather than looking to someone who, may have their best interests at heart, but just be misguided, this may be an attempted shamanic awakening of this person that then gets hijacked and moved in a different direction.
And I've talked to a lot of people who've been hypnotized, and I don't sense that so much. So yeah, but I know exactly the concern you're addressing. Yeah. So I know that some people treat hypnosis as like a cure-all, as far as like, now I'll know the truth, and that really, what's her name, Yvonne Smith, and I don't think she actually did this on purpose, but she had a website, and it was, you would click on it, it would have the big letters, "Find the Truth Through Hypnosis," and that just made me cringe. And I don't know if she wrote that line or if some sort of eager marketing person, that was doing her webmaster had created that. So,
well, leaving aside the idea or this suspicion that some hypnotherapists would be leading the person under hypnosis to a certain narrative, through the questions they're asking them, leaving aside that, what I fear is that hypnosis may be a way of rushing the person into trying to confront things that they are not ready to integrate into their consciousness.
But so is ayahuasca, and so is mushrooms, and so is
yeah, and it is a grueling experience. With ayahuasca, there are people who say, I'm really glad to see it, to have gone through it. I don't want to do it ever again.
Yeah.
But like when we look at the grays, okay, so you get grays in ayahuasca trips. You have them painted on cave walls, which, some people will interpret as ancient aliens, but it's more likely altered states of consciousness. Yep. And when you connect all that together, like what's really going on here, and what does it have to do with altered states? Because obviously some of the UFO phenomena is physical. That it's not just in an altered state, although a good portion of it may be.
Agreed. And I would say that being severely depressed is an altered state.
Yes.
True.
Yeah, I would say so too.
Yeah.
And being in a mania state is an altered state too. Where people who suffer from bipolar issues, get this absolute irrational high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what experiencers, abductees, most of them say is that what the most harrowing part of the experience is confronting the eyes of the beings, is because the eyes are like mirrors, right? It's almost like the eyes of the beings are mirrors that they are making the person confront parts of their psyche they don't want to face, like a mirror forcing you to confront your shadow.
Yeah. And that is interesting. The eye thing is always interesting.
Yeah.
And not just with the whole alien thing with the grays with the big eyes, but like the red-eyed monsters you get. Mm-hmm. Why red eyes?
There is no animal with glowing red eyes that actually physically glow. There's certainly, if you shine a light,
there's eye shine.
There's eye shine.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's very strange, and I just remember like the little funny beings that picked up Luke Skywalker on the with the big giant sand crawler or something like that.
The Jawas.
The Jawas.
Yeah. They have the little glowing eyes, and I'm like, there's no animal that really has those glowing eyes. So I think that's like an archetype almost.
True.
Yeah. But why? What is it about eyes that means so much to us?
The eyes are the gateway to the they're connected right to the brain in a lot of ways.
Yeah, they are the outside the window of the soul.
Yeah. I mean, they're physically connected right to the brain. So
But is the brain the seat of the soul?
that's a good question. Depends on who you talk to. Yeah, I mean, the brain. So is the brain just a television receiver tuning into some sort of cosmic, collective wavelength?
Mhm.
I think the brain is a reality interpreter.
Or a reality, what would you call it? Like where we have to filter out things. It's a reality filter, because if we have our eyes and our ears and our senses, we should, by all rights, be completely overloaded. Oh my God, I'm in this room. There's 10 million things in this room. There's I got to shut it all down. There's noises in the background. I try to drive, and there's how can you drive with oh my God, you got a dashboard, you got things speeding by, you've got, but how do we manage? We're filtering out. That's how we manage it. So yeah, it's two things. It's filtering out a vast amount of data so we can focus on the task at hand.
A reality modulator.
There we go. It may also project some of our reality.
True.
Yeah. Yeah, there was David Weatherly was doing some research on the fellow, I can't remember the author's name, the author who wrote The Shadow. He wrote the little pulp fiction novels of The Shadow, the mystical crime fighter who had gone to Tibet and learned to cast a shadow over man's eyes, So but he wrote so many books, like a fantastic amount, and this is like an era of when you were typing on paper, and so he was cranking these things out. So he was like in a physical headspace of just creating this fictional character. And in his house, which is in New York City in Greenwich Village, the present owners, it's kind of considered a haunted house, and it's not uncommon for these owners to see a figure with a fedora dressed like the fictional character, the Shadow. So did he manifest this out of pure intent, this ghost apparition that now stalks the house?
Yeah.
What I'm fascinated about with people who study patients suffering with schizophrenia is that they have learned, or they have been aware that the phenomenon of hearing voices is different across cultures or across countries. Where, for example, people who hear voices in the United States, the voices tend to be very negative. The voices tends to be, kill, hurt your neighbor or set your house on fire. Whereas someone hearing voices in India, the voices will be telling them, now it's a good time to clean the house. No? So in some countries, the voices are, telling messages of, hurting people or hurting themselves. In other countries, the voices are giving actually good advice or advice about, clean yourself or call your mother because you haven't called her in a while. So that to me is interesting, the idea of how you're, like you were saying, your mind is maybe interpreting the world, and your mind maybe also giving you other hints or interpretations about the world. And in our culture, in our Western culture, it's maybe it's a result of like I say, how toxic it is.
Yeah.
This extra input is just also toxic.
The what is?
The extra input that you may, people,
Oh.
the schizophrenics, if you are going away with the idea that the brain is, radio receiver, then schizophrenics may be people who are not able to turn down the dial, the volume dial a notch.
Mm-hmm.
They're receiving all the information at full length, and the way that they cope with it, it's different. Some people cope with it in a very negative way, which is, people who are trying to hurt themselves or hurt each other, whereas some people, maybe may use that in a positive way. And maybe if we go back to the shamanic model, there are cultures who manage to recognize that and to realize that that person is being called to perform a very special duty, and that it is the duty of the village to try to help that person to go through that, crisis, in order to go and go through their shamanic trials. It's like the book Black Elk Speaks. This kid who had this dream of that was interpreted by the village, and the whole village was trying to help him, in understand the dream, and they all did their part in order to recreate the dream for the child, and the dream turned out to be kind of like prophetic. It was a dream about the coming of the Westerners, to the lands of Native Americans.
So how much of our current issues with depression might be queued up to being spiritual issues?
I feel a great deal. I feel it's more of a spiritual problem, more than a chemical, chemical brain imbalance. We talk about, in biology, we talk about suffering from bacteriological or virus infections. What about spiritual infections? And I know that kind of sounds like Scientology with the cold feet and things, although that idea itself tends to be replicated or it's similar to the beliefs of other cultures. So, maybe L. Ron Hubbard, hijacked that and used
probably
to exploit their people and say, if you pay me $5,000 a month, I'm gonna get rid you of those, spiritual viruses that are, plaguing you.
I mean, he did steal a lot of stuff, working with Parsons and stuff.
Sure.
Was connected with Crowley.
Mm-hmm.
As far as is it a spiritual issue? So my sense is, yes, you can take a blood test. Actually, it's a very difficult test to test someone's levels of what's the stuff in your brain. It's done
serotonin?
through serotonin levels. It's very difficult to do you have to go through the spinal tap of some sort because it's in your brain chemistry in your spinal fluid. So that's in its own little special sac. So it's a little difficult and painful to actually get the numbers. But yes, people have a physiological chemical imbalance that can be registered in using technologies like microscopes and such. What I feel, so you're confronted with a real physiological thing, a head injury, right? So the football players getting severely depressed, you're having brain injuries, and then they end up shooting themselves with a gun in the heart, and their suicide note says, "Dissect my brain," so nobody else has to go through this. You're confronted with a physical ailment.
True.
And you then go down the avenue, a spiritual avenue. You are led grudgingly, unwittingly, sometimes just through sheer exhaustion of trying everything else. I feel like many people go through a spiritual change because of their physical malady, and I'm certainly.
Or could it be the opposite sometimes? Could it be that a spiritual malady, gives way to a chemical reaction in the brain? The idea of how your mind affects your own physiology. I mean, it's kind of like a chicken and egg conundrum.
Yes, that's a perfect way to put it. It's a chicken and egg conundrum, but there is a very powerful spiritual component to whether it may not be apparent to the person suffering from in the depths of depression, but to the people who work hard, they are gonna have to look the spiritual issue. They're gonna have to address the spiritual issue.
Okay.
And if they don't,
And
then I mean, maybe whatever. I'm saying I'm using myself as an example. So I'm talking
Sure.
high and mighty here, and I'm talking about myself. So yes, I wrestled with this stuff. I've spent years and years and years on Prozac. As I said earlier, I spent years being the depressed guy. That was my identity. I was the depressed guy. Go on a long walk with me. It was going to come up, and I was going to talk your ear off, about my problems. And then, and I had to go down the spiritual avenue. And like the Seth material, I went down to channeled books about God, which seems like I never would have thought that. And I don't have any real belief in God in that kind of way, any kind of churchy way. And, but there is and then here it gets even weirder. And then it was after all that. It was after all my depression issues, struggling with it, coming out the other end, that I am then hit with the UFO stuff. Felt like this. If there was like a script writer of reality, I would say the stage was set, right? So Act 1, Mike gets depressed. Act 2, Mike gets over his depression. Act 3, the really weird stuff. Now he has to deal with this UFO stuff. That's way oversimplified, but I recognize that plays out as a sort of linear narrative.
Yeah.
So I guess we could say, I mean, it's not like we're saying, oh, don't go to see a therapist, a licensed therapist. Don't go and take Prozac, because you, Mike, you certainly took a benefit out of it. I think that what we're saying is, I mean, this helps. This kind of medicines helps to get you into a certain level of clear-mindedness. But then when you reach that clear-mindedness is when you need to do other work. And that's when you need to go into the kind of spiritual work that will actually help you to get rid of the root of the depression, because otherwise you're just treating the symptoms, which is, just like the way, Western medicine tends to do. We think that if you take away the symptoms, you cure the malady, and that's not the case, because you need to go to the root of the problem, and that root will lead you to facing very difficult and very strange avenues of yourself, of confronting things that maybe you didn't want to confront. You wouldn't, you felt that you weren't ready to, but you will need to do it, and it is at some time. And this is something that I feel is important, you guys. You need to at one point be part of a community that go and build some kind of relationships with people who are going through the same thing, or who are of the same interests, and those people will become a safety net. Those people will help you deal with those aspects. That they will be the people that hold your hand when you are trying to find your way through the darkness, if you will.
And I mean, and the fact that we have the internet also kind of kind of helps in that respect.
Oh, yeah.
Because you can reach out to the internet. I mean, granted, there are certain places you don't want to reach out where you're going to get trolled. But overall, you can reach out and, hopefully get some response back, some support.
And I think of like, where the bartender, from decades ago may have played a role, or where the, or where, I mean, the church, the bartender, the who knows? I mean, I what I think about also is that I think people suffered terribly because of the stigma of this, and I'm just wondering how many alcoholics or drug addicts or recluses, were suffering from something that could have been treated.
Sure.
Absolutely. Because if that stigma makes people not want to talk.
Yeah.
And it was considered it was not polite dinner conversation to talk about this. And now I feel like it is a little more accepted and the stigma has come down many notches. Might be uncomfortable, but it's the stigma is much lessened now, and I'm grateful and glad to be living now in this era, struggling with this. And we never could have had this conversation. There was no such thing as podcasts, 15 years ago, so we wouldn't have been able to do it anyway. But yeah, this would have been a very difficult conversation to have so frankly, 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah.
Let alone 50 years ago.
Well, I mean, and there are a lot of people, and there still are, who, if they hear that someone's depressed, they're like, well, just shake it off and, get back to things. And it's like, okay, when you don't care about anything, you're not shaking it off.
Yeah.
But they don't get that because unless you've experienced that feeling, you don't know the depths of, like, despair that it leaves you with.
Yeah. I remember I just was like, at the time I was just living in Maine and I was very depressed and I was living alone and I called up the psychiatrist or the psychologist that I was working with, and it was not the day of the week that I was supposed to come and visit. And basically I was saying, like, this is dangerous right now. It's bad. And he kind of said, well, get out and try to get a little exercise. He said, swing your arms when you walk. That'll get a little more. I was like, oh, swing my arms when I walk. That'll shake me out of it.
And now we've cured depression.
So yeah, I just remember thinking, like, God, here's like the therapist that's supposed to be my. He was a nice enough guy, but I just remember him saying, swing your arms when you walk, and I was I think it's a little beyond that at this point. So I was basically saying I was suicidal,
right.
And that was the advice I got. So,
wow. Did it work?
I never went for a walk. No, I probably just sat on the couch and stared at the wall and felt miserable. So,
I was going to say because you're still here.
I said something worked. Yeah. So, and honestly, this is crappy, and it's like, I think about, like, why didn't I commit suicide? I wrote a 9-page essay. I got depressed, and it was the worst in 1993, and probably around 1996, 4 years later, and this was very therapeutic for me. I wrote a 9-page essay, and there's probably 5 people on earth who've read that essay, and it is grim. And a couple of them are therapists, and they were like, they read it and like, wow, kind of impressed you made it through that. But yes, so I don't know the reasons I made it through it. I do not know the reasons why I didn't commit suicide, but I didn't. And this is like more like the therapist couch, kind of thing. But I feel like one of the maladies is that you have an irrational feeling of guilt. And I felt like I deserved that guilt for absolutely irrational reasons. I did not deserve the guilt. I didn't do anything wrong. But there was this balance, oh, I feel bad and I deserve to feel bad. So the more I feel bad, the more I deserve to feel bad. And it was this tape loop that was so toxic, but somehow I survived it. So I don't know if I probably, that's now we're getting to the really uncomfortable stuff where everyone has the right to kind of say, yikes, let's change the subject.
But that is something people experience. They have that feeling like nobody cares about them, no one loves them. Why would they? They're horrible people, but they're not, and it doesn't come from a place of like logic.
No. Yeah, I just think you leave certain valves turned off for too long. Like whatever that might be, whether it's the brain chemistry pumping through your, through your spinal fluid, just gets shut off, and then it just your mind has no choice but to build these narratives.
Yeah.
And those narratives can get bleak. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And luckily you made it through. Now, Red Pill, have you ever used any medication for your depression?
Yeah, well, I told you, I tried antidepressives for a little while. But the fact that they were so expensive that I couldn't afford them made me more depressed. So at one point I said, well, screw it, I won't use them anymore. And maybe it was a good choice on my part, because I see, probably shouldn't say this, I see someone who is very close to me, who is related to me, who has become way too dependent on antidepressants. And I personally, don't see any improvement from them, on her or on that person. And that's why, I, like I said, I don't want to be like the Tom Cruise and say, yeah, well, the psychiatry is horse manure and there's nothing to that. But I do feel that, I don't know, maybe it's kind of like less Prozac, more Plato, like the idea that, the medicine can be a good crutch if you're, if you broke your leg, but if you become too dependent on them, then you will never be able to walk again, on your own. That you need to get off the crutch at some time, and put your feet on the ground and try to walk on your own.
Which is why it probably worked for Mike, because you got off of it.
7 years.
Yeah,
so
but you still got
I got
off
of it. But I mean, it was like, I think I could have gotten off of it sooner, like looking back at it now. And I definitely, I remember like being freaked out, like when well, actually it's interesting because the drugs that I were on, Prozac in particular, has a sort of long half-life. So if you stop taking Prozac, it takes it just slowly dims down, and then you lose the effects, and that takes about 2 weeks. So that's building. So you have plenty of time to get to the drugstore and get some more. But I remember that feeling of like, oh God, I kept traveling and like, shoot, I fucked up. I forgot my, and how panicky that felt. Yeah. So I understand that feeling. Yeah. And it was real.
So, yeah, I mean, people, like I said, there's so many people who suffer from this. When I made a post about being slightly depressed, which is what started this whole thing, my depression at the time was hit by a number of bad things, all kind of connecting at once and making me feel just like absolutely like, how am I going to get out of this mess? It's just like one thing after another slamming into me. But that's more of a cause and effect sort of depression.
True.
But as I said, I've felt, and since then, I've just hit periods of depression off and on the last few weeks, and they're not severe, but they're enough where I'm just like, I don't care about doing anything right now. And it's like I have to kind of fight through it and be like, I got to do something. If I start doing something, I'll feel a little bit, even if it's playing a video game, which sometimes remarkably does great things because you get kind of lost into playing the video game, even if you don't care at first. And, but it's not always possible to do that, to pull yourself out of it.
And I had my darkest was the December of 1992. So the winter of 92, 93, and it was, and I've looked back at the calendar and my diary and it was like my work diary, and it was the darkest day, like the darkest day when I went to the doctor was December 21st, the winter solstice. Like I went to this doctor on the winter solstice. It's like couldn't be more textbook that it was based on the sunlight.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not a fan of sunlight. That's not my issue.
Oh, you have to take a bit of dose of mescaline in order to appreciate the sunlight, Soraya. For the last 2 years, no, that's wrong. I've gone 2 years to a ritual ceremony in which the sacrament is peyote. And you feel that you're not really getting anything out of it, not really any transcendental thing about the universe. But when the sun rises, it's that's the thing that's worth the trouble of the whole thing, and that's when you see the world anew. You see the world with different eyes. That's one of the really things that I get out of that,
That's interesting. I've just always been a fan of the darkness.
Well, the darkness is cool, I mean, the stars, if you manage to see, you go to a place where there are a lot of stars, and that's from a person who lives in one of the most polluted cities in the world. If you get to see more than 5 stars in the night sky, it's like, wow. So probably if I went to a place where I could actually see the Milky Way, I probably would think that I died, and I'm having a near-death experience.
And I just spent almost 2 weeks working for a guide service in the Sierra Mountains of California. And every single night I slept out under the stars, and boy, we were at high elevations and you sure could see the Milky Way. The stars were phenomenal. And then I treat that, and I talk about that in the Owl book. I treat sleeping on the ground under the stars as an act of abandonment. It is a spiritual act for me.
I've always been a night person. I've always felt more connected to the night, but I also like the fact, like, it's something about being awake when most of the world's asleep, or at least, the hemisphere. It's not as true now as it was years ago, because more and more people stay up late and, don't go to sleep early, but there's just something about being awake when everyone else is asleep that I kind of enjoy. Yeah,
and I like it. I mean, I've changed. My life has changed in the last decade or so, and I get up much earlier than I ever did before, and that's the same thing. I love getting up that like watching the sun come up. In fact, that's one of the rituals I had on this trip. And there was a few people, and I would say, listen, what we're going to do, we're going to get up at 5 a.m. and we're going to make coffee, and we're going to watch the sunrise here in the mountains. And it was magical. It was so wonderful. So a few people we'd all sit around, and we'd freezing cold. It was cold, and the clear skies, and so make a little cup of coffee and a little camp stove and watch the sun come up. It was just so wonderful.
I had a very crappy job last year, that forced me to go and wake up at 5:30 in the morning, try to go and drive to my commute. 7:30 at the latest. I was horrible. The only thing good about it is, trying to see that exactly the idea of seeing the sunrise, and that very, very clear sky when the city is just waking up. And if you had the chance to see Mount Popocatépetl and Ixtlacihuatl, the two volcanoes that are, like facing the city of Mexico, and if you manage to see that, on the rising sun, that made the whole horrible thing of waking up at that ungodly hour worthwhile.
enough.
I lived in New York City for a while, and I remember I would work for a film, doing film stuff where I had to get up very early to get to the set on time, and I was doing making coffee and stuff. It wasn't that glamorous, but that was a magical. So here's this big dirty city in the '80s, New York City, and it was magical that time of the morning. It's, with sun coming up in the summer.
And again, not a ton of people around.
No, we have a busy, crowded city that felt all empty.
Yeah. I've anytime I have to go to New York City, I've had to pick people up in New York City. I always go in the middle of the night, and it's a really interesting feeling because it's, it's this massive city and there's no one around.
Yeah, depending on what neighborhood you're in, yeah.
Well, yeah, obviously. But you can go through Manhattan and see almost nobody.
Yeah.
There's a car here and there. And again, I like that feeling.
Yeah.
It's almost a feeling of isolation.
Well, I think anyone loves, there's something poetic about it, sure. It's a Neil Young song, waiting to be written, that kind of thing, yeah.
All right. So I guess one of the important things is what other advice can we give people who are dealing with depression? Is there anything else we have not suggested that we should?
I mean, first of all, just, don't misuse the term depression. If sometimes people say I'm feeling kind of depressed, I'm you're just stressed out, and stress can certainly lead to depression, but just do the little online 10 questions. Usually if you answer, yes to 6 or more of these questions, you're, showing signs of clinical depression, that's an easy way to start. I would say, see a clinician, someone you trust, and it can be someone kind of far out too. I mean, there's someone you trust and someone you have a rapport with, because I've had some people I've talked to that I had no rapport at all with, and I made no headway at all. And then, I just
and the thing is, there are good therapists and bad therapists. Just like there are good doctors, good dentists, etc. You just got to find the right
one that fits your needs. Yeah. So the one you have a rapport with.
Yeah. And the one who seems to actually care and isn't just, doing it to make money off.
Yeah.
If you walk in and the first thing they do is, let's see what drugs we can give you.
And that's actually what psychotherapy has turned to in a lot of ways, and I've had conversations with, that's, and then from my point of view, if you try, if you feel you need to go on medication, but just recognize that it's a temporary thing and do your best to make headway while on the medication. This is coming from my own direct experience. I made very good headway initially, and then I stayed on the medication years too long.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, another advice is, you have to reach out to people around you, family, friends. You have to have that kind of safety net, social safety nets. And don't feel afraid to, ask for help. That I guess that the number one thing that you hear about people who committed suicide is that the people around them is, I didn't know that, he or she was going through that. It's because people who are really serious about, committing suicide, they don't talk about it. They're the quiet ones. So, try to reach out. You are not as alone as you think you are. And another thing is, like Mike said, that this kind of thing is probably more common among people who have some kind of creative strike. And I feel that it is the result of not being able to express that side of yourself. So try to find a way to express that side of yourself. And it can be anything. It can be through music, playing the guitar, playing the harmonica, singing in your, your bath, and you're in the rain while you're commuting, drawing, doodling, you buy a notebook, buy a pen and start doodling. And or anything that can help you try to unleash that what you feel that is bottling up. And if it's bottling up long enough, it might fester inside of you, and that's not what you want to happen.
No. And talk to people. Don't be afraid to talk to people, because more people, like I said, it's almost epidemic in this country that people are depressed. So, I mean, chances are if you open up, you know, I guess it depends on your circle of friends, but chances are you're going to find other people who go, "Oh yeah, I understand," and you're going to be able to maybe talk to them a little bit about it.
Mm-hmm.
But the worst thing you can do is just keep it all bottled up.
Yeah.
Because that way you're not, it's never getting out. You're not going to feel better about it. You really have to, you know, take that chance and reach out. I mean, what do you got to lose if you're that depressed, really?
Yeah, I agree.
Another good advice is going to nature, right?
Yes.
I live in one of the biggest cities in the world, but there's a place near where I live in which I can go and there are trees, you know, and go and taking a walk nearby trees, you know, listening to a podcast, you know, like Where Did the Road Go, or Hidden Experience, and listening to that and thinking about things and being in a place which you can see things growing. That is, to me, incredibly therapeutic. You know, seeing things alive, growing, seeing leaves, seeing branches. You know, it made me realize how much I love trees. You know, how much trees are important to me. You know, even if you don't have access to trees, you know, if you manage to have a place in which you can plant a garden, you know, that I recently trying to get into gardening, you know, and trying to grow a few things, and I managed to find, you know, that how much pleasure you can find in seeing things grow. So, you know, nature is also a good therapy.
Yes. I remember there was some point I was depressed within the last few years. And where I live is kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So I have a lot of trees around. I have some fields around. And I started walking down the road, pitch darkness. And I was just kind of walking, you know. And I ended up between two fields with insect noises, you know, like the crickets and everything else.
Yeah.
And they were so loud. It was unreal. Like so loud that it almost created an altered state of consciousness, because these crickets were just overwhelmingly there, you know, and it was almost like being just inundated with that sense of life around you. And it completely alleviated the depression.
Oh, wonderful.
Interesting.
And I mean, it was almost loud enough to hurt, but not quite. And I've never heard them that loud before.
How interesting. So you've never heard them that loud before, and it seems like, I mean, this is me talking, you know, like I would speculate, you know, like, or I would, it's playful to, I mean, was it divine intervention? Did like God turn up the volume knob just for therapy? A little sound therapy,
or something,
or who God, or, you know, whatever, Mother Nature, or, you know, the elves and fairies, you know, hiding behind the trees. Who did it? That doesn't matter, but that you received a benefit is what's important.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But sometimes taking walks in nature does help, and things like exercise and eating right also help.
Yeah.
True.
Because a lot of times when you're depressed, you lose your appetite, I think.
Yeah,
said,
that's
Mike.
the first sign. Very first sign I get is my appetite goes away. And when I do eat, you know, like you go and the hours and hours and day goes by and you haven't really eaten anything, then you gorge yourself on sugar. Yeah, you're eating, and then that created a vicious cycle of just that was just toxic for my mood.
All right. Any last words?
There's hope.
Yes.
There is hope.
That is good.
It may sound trite, but it's especially to someone in the throes of this. But yes, there is hope.
And no matter how bad things are, there is always hope. You just don't always know where it's coming from.
And it's gonna, my sense is gonna come from the weirdest, most like where you're looking, you're not gonna find it. It's often gonna come from somewhere else.
And no matter what you think, in your at your worst, there is a reason why you're here. There is a role you need to play in this, this play, and it's an important one. It's an important one, no matter what you think,
All right. I think that's that's good. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't really know what to expect here when we went. I said, sure. You said like, I'll do a round table. I had no idea who the guests were going to be. I thought it would be like 10 people or something. And this has been really rewarding and pleasant. And I feel good about these last couple hours.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, great. Even better.